right. Looks like the lobby is emptied. Cool. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us for our very first Threat Talk. Um, we are looking forward to sharing some insights and intelligence that we've gathered with you. We're going to go ahead and get started here. So, Threat Talk is new. What it is a monthly customer lunch and learn to provide all of you with timely and relevant intelligence, right? This call and this talk is recorded and will be provided to you after we are all done here. Active questions are encouraged. Right now, we're going to use the Q&A widget. You can submit that anonymously through the bottom of Zoom there. These are technical discussions, so please feel free to jump in with any questions you may have for our team. And for the future, feel free to invite anyone on your team who may benefit from what we're sharing here with you all today. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to the experts.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. And thanks for everyone for joining us. So my name is John Dwyer, so Director of Security Research and Head of ARC Labs, which is great to finally announce. So mark your calendars, next Tuesday, ARC Labs at Binary Defense launches. The blog will be live with some great content, and we'll be putting content out there as it goes. And then there's a webinar to register on the 23rd to learn more about what ARC Labs is and what we'll be doing. So I do a lot of stuff here at Binary Defense, mostly mining the information that the security teams have, looking for interesting insights, as well as doing net new research to kind of help the community. And this is an example of that. Take the time to understand a threat like this so that we can talk about it, so that you can take in turns and talk to your leadership or your teams about what this actually means. And so, we love to share this information for you and then have a great conversation. JP?
Hey, thanks, John. I'm JP Castellanos. I'm the Director of Threat Intelligence here at Binary Defense. I've been in this role for a little over a year now. Previously, I was the Middle Eastern North African subject matter expert working at a Fortune 10 oil and gas company. And then before that, I worked in the Department of Defense for 15 years. Those last 10 years, I was working at United States Central Command as part of the Active Cyber Defense Team, which is comprised of a team of threat hunters, insider threat, and threat intelligence. And just to give you a little bit more background to my team, if you guys haven't met us yet, me and my team, we come with a total of 50 years of experience in threat intelligence. We have some very unique capabilities. For example, we have analysts that have multilingual capabilities. We have a Ukrainian that speaks both Russian and Ukrainian, and this allows us to get into some of the more popular Russian language forums and be able to communicate with the threat actors without the need of any kind of translation software that could be easily captured by someone within the culture. Because of that, we also have a diverse set of expertise in geopolitical areas as well. We have subject matter experts in Russia, China, Iran, like myself, as well as technical subject matter experts on spear phishing and ransomware campaigns. And our team is mostly focused on supporting our threat hunt, digital risk protection, analysis on demand, and SOC with our analysis and reporting of threat activity going on in cyberspace. Our goal is to provide our binary defense family and clients accurate, relevant, and actionable information needed for you to help better understand the threats that you're facing, along with the best information on how to mitigate against them. And a few times that I've engaged with folks, they're always like, "Oh, Intel, what are you going to do? How are you going to scare us this time?" And I like to say my favorite quote from the Pixar film Monsters, Inc. is, "We scare because we care." So that's kind of a quick rundown of my team.
Sick. All right. So let's just jump into the meat of it here. The XZ backdoor. So before we get there, in case you haven't heard or you don't know what XZ is, so XZ is a very common compression utility that is packaged into a lot of mainstream Linux distributions, and it's used heavily for developers because of its compression rate, and you get a lot of things like software packages or updates through XZ packages. And because of that, and because it works so well, it is included by default. Now, the only thing crazier about this whole story is the crazy information of how it was detected. So the guy that detected this was a Microsoft engineer who was doing some benchmark testing as to why his SSH logins were happening a half second slower than normal, and stumbled upon the backdoor, which is just amazing. Thinking about the implications this could have had had it been able to make its way into the main distributions of Linux is just absolutely insane. And so I would love to shake that guy's hand, because that is the crazy bit of circumstances there. He should probably never pay for a beer for the rest of his life. It was really awesome. So what the backdoor, and we'll dive into the backdoor as we go through this, but what I think is really interesting is the lead up to what caused the backdoor to be implemented and the level of social engineering that took place for this to accomplish. And this was a long con. This started back in 2022 and then was just implemented. And as we piece it together, one of the great things about this happening in the open source is that you can see the different commits to the repo. You can see the communications that happen through the mailing list, and you can kind of understand how this all unfolded. So XZ was maintained by a single person, and that person did this as a hobby project, right? And you got to really feel for him in this moment, because he was taken advantage of by these operators to implement this backdoor. And so back in 2022, we have a user who was submitting legitimate software updates through the mailing list to get merged into the repo, to help out the XZ packages. So it was improving it. These were actual software updates and patches that made the project better. And as this operator started implementing legitimate patches, you can start seeing pressure tactics being implemented from third parties to pressure the maintainer of the XZ repository to say, you're implementing patches too slowly. Like, we should just abandon this project. It's hopeless. You can never get around to all the things that we want to get to. You really need to consider adding someone else as a maintainer to the project. And this continues for a year, where the operator is submitting legitimate packages. More pressure is coming in to say, you need to get someone else to help you with this. You can't keep up. You need to. And you can see in 2023, that operator has gained some trust by the maintainer of the project, because he starts merging content into the GitHub repo. And at that same time, the first pieces of the backdoor code are submitted through a pull request in GitHub. If you're not familiar with how that actually works, is you can submit what we refer to as a PR to a GitHub project, which basically is a piece of code to say, I wrote this piece of code, I tested it, I think it worked, and this should be merged into the main project. And we can see that happen from a third party. So not the operator and not the person who is emailing and harassing the maintainer, but another person submits a PR. And the operator actually merges it into the project. So we can start seeing, I'm going to butcher the name here, so please forgive me, but Jia Tang is the name of the person that is attributed to the GitHub account that had done these merges. You can see him slowly start to get more control over the repository. And then finally in 2024, we see the final commit happen a few weeks ago. And this actually merged in the backdoor into the XZ utilities, right? Now, you may be asking, well, Dwyer, if there's this long trail of commits and communication to the package, because it's open source, you can see everything that goes into it. How was this person able to commit a backdoor into the project without someone noticing? And we had to rely on the complete luck of this Microsoft engineer to discover it. Well, this is where it starts showing the technical capabilities of the operation here. Not only did they implement the long multi-year sort of social engineering aspect, but what they actually did is the backdoor is not in the raw code of XZ Utils. So he actually hijacked the build process. So he merged in what would call they were called like tests, and they were actually binaries, right? So you couldn't just view the contents of them. And within these couple binary files, during the build process, he actually hijacked for them to actually go ahead, read into the binary data, grab certain aspects of it, compile that into an obfuscated bash script. And that bash script would deobfuscate it and append it to the end of the build process to merge in the backdoor. So it wasn't very visible until people started digging into this. It was a very sneaky way, because when you look at, if you're an open source user of software, you see that there's often test functions built in there, especially on new releases as they're working out to it. So like this would go usually like beta test, and then we'll go to an unstable version tagged unstable, and then go into production. And if you're usually working with the latest releases, you will see test stuff within the repo. So it's not unheard of to see there. So him knowing that and then architecting a way to package that information in a way that would be obfuscated away from someone looking at the commits, and then obfuscated even further by making the bash commands look like complete Klingon if you were to look at it, that appends that information in, kind of really highlights how big of an operation was and how patient they were of doing this step by step by step, never doing it all at once until it was time to execute. So that's how we got where we are today. That's kind of the high level version of how this operation took place from beginning to end. Next slide, Ryan. Okay. Now, and I've got this question a few times. I'd be like, dude, okay, so XZ is a compression tool. What does that have to do with SSH? And we know this is targeting SSH, and I'll dive into it to explain what that does. In many of the major distributions of Linux that are commonly used, like in enterprises, like the Ubuntu's and Debian-based packages, they actually use this library called liblzma, and they patch OpenSSH to require that library. And that library allows OpenSSH to interact with systemd, right? So this allows it to do things like service notifications and other sort of like operational capabilities that are extended beyond the portable standard out of the box OpenSSH. And in the two little screenshots here, on the left-hand side, you can see the libraries that are required to run OpenSSH. Those are the default. So if you just clone the OpenSSH repo and wanted to run an OpenSSH server, you could do that. And you can see that the required libraries is very small, and liblzma is not in there. On the right-hand side, you can see what are the default libraries that are required to run SSH on a Ubuntu box or Kali or whatever the ones. And you can see the list is a lot longer. And that's because they do that for functionality purposes, ease of use. And one of them in there is the liblzma. And you can see that as that binary runs, so SSD or SSHD when it runs, and that's the service, the daemon functionality of SSH, which runs the server, it's going to load that library. And that's where the backdoor was implemented into the package, right? So when the OpenSSH server runs, it loads the backdoored library. That library does its thing to allow the exploit to occur. Next slide. So how does the backdoor work? So this is wicked cool. I've been diving into the actual code of it, and it's really, really neat. So the way that the library works, right, in Linux, you can have these things called linkers, right? And in Windows, malware does this. You might have heard the term hooking before, and it's like hooking process, hooking libraries. And the way this backdoor works is that when it gets a SSH public key sort of authentication request, normally the OpenSSH binary will pull in the RSA function, because RSA is the most common. That's public and private key authentication. We use it everywhere. What this will actually do will hook the linker file and point and say, instead of going to here in the memory space, go here in the memory space when you're doing RSA authentication, and that's where the backdoor lives. So it's redirecting the execution flow to going to a memory space that it actually controls, which contains the backdoor information. And the backdoor information works like this, which is also very, very neat. So what they do is basically this allows for arbitrary command execution without authenticating. So you bypass. They pack if you ever looked at an RSA packet before, there is a part of the packet where the header has the CI, the certificate authority signing information, the key in the end value, and they pack the command in there. And the hooked process here that's doing the RSA decrypt, there is a hard-coded public key in the backdoor. And it does some checks, and it says, okay, if the magic value here is 3 in this case, then we know that this is an attempt to activate the backdoor. Let's see if our backdoor is signed with a known private key, and if it is, then it will execute the command. If it's not, it'll fail and pass that off to a normal execution or reject the authentication. When you see this in actual action, when you send the payload, you get a handshake failure as an error. So like you never get an authentication event. Like the OpenSSH server says, no, I don't want anything to do with this, but the hooked function will actually process that command and execute. And that's because it does a public and private key authentication. So what we can take from that is that this was designed to be an exploit that would be only controlled by the attackers who put it in place, because they would be the only ones that would have the private key to enable this exploitation. If you tried to do something similar, even if you were able to copy exactly how to formulate the payload, if the backdoored libLZMA library did not have a matching key for how you would sign your command execution, it would fail, right? So this was very much targeted to be only used by a very specific function, by a very specific group, or, you know, we can kind of speculate on what it may have been used for. I don't think we have any information on that. JP can talk a little bit more about, like, you know, what this actually means from a threat intelligence point of view. This is just to explain how this actually works. So what's important from this is you won't be able to see an authentication event where you could tie it to an IP or whatever, because you will just see a handshake failure from an SSH point of view. What will happen though is basically bypass this SSH authentication allows for you to do whatever command execution that you want, that you can pack into the CA signing key in the end value. So that was very interesting, because this is a level of sophistication that's quite advanced, because it leaves no real trace from a logging point of view, unless the capabilities out there now. There's a tool out there called XZ and it will allow you to patch the OpenSSH binary so that you can get logs whenever authentication attempt comes with a private key that you, or the private key that you specify. Next slide. Okay, so what does exploitation actually look like? This is actually the good news, right? So this is a be able to recreate the exploit. And what in this example that I did is I have like a simple HTTP server on one of my other machines in the lab. I got my popped version of Kali running, so it's got the backdoor actively running with patch with a key set that I control. And what you can see there in the red box is that you can see that the SSHD process will spawn shell and then run the command. So the command was curl to download evil.7zip. And that would execute without me having to authenticate. I would get a handshake fail error from my side from the SSH attempt, although it was successful and I was able to command execute. You can see the 200s on the side showing that it actually worked. Next slide. And here is kind of just what it would look like. So you can see on the right-hand side, the handshake failure, but my command was run, which was to just echo the string command exec to a temp file. If I go ahead and cat on the left-hand side, you can see I cat the contents of that, and you see my string matches. And then those are the logs in terms of, like, I didn't get any sort of session opened or authentication from an IP or username or SSH key or anything along those lines. So from a logging point of view, it is pretty silent and pretty slick. So unless you're kind of like very, very inspecting all the activity on your box, you might miss this, right? Because we are all monitoring our SSH logs looking for anomalous authentications, things like that. But we may not have the ability to kind of dive into all of the handshakes that are going on to see if there's anomalous activity, because as you guys probably know, if you have an SSH server hanging out on the internet, people are going to scan you. They're going to try to authenticate. So it's going to be very, very noisy from a handshake failure point of view. So it's like a worthless telemetry source, but you do have the opportunity looking at the child process from SSHD. Next slide. Now, taking a step back, what can we learn from this? And if we go back in history and think about all the big mass exploitation events that had occurred, this could have been one. We were very, very lucky that it wasn't, but we have an opportunity. And this is, we never waste a crisis, right? This was all on the news. And if we're talking about a strategy in terms of like, what is security going to look like for all of our companies in 2024 and beyond, we need to kind of pivot away from waiting for the next supply chain and the next 0 day that we're not prepared for to then scramble and react to this. So here is a lot of examples. There's Log4j on here, there's SolarWinds on here, Proxy Shell, and the Move It. Yeah, the Move It one, and maybe Go Anywhere, the one on the right, but it's Tomcat. Now, what can we learn from just looking at this is that if we think about what attackers need to do to be successful, like they usually need to use an exploit to bypass authentication, to bypass some sort of security control so that they can achieve command execution on the target host. And they would do that through, like in this example, where they would have arbitrary command execution, or maybe they get a traversal vulnerability and they can upload a web shell and then they can interact with that host. But they need to accomplish that to go in line with their goals and the objectives. From a criminal point of view, like the threat landscape has moved largely to an extortion-based attack, and their objectives, their goal is to make money, right? They make money through two main objectives right now. We'll leave business email compromise and cryptojacking over here for a second, but let's talk about like interactive sort of hands-on keyboard. Their objectives are to extort you either through something like encryption event, through ransomware, or steal data to name and shame you, to elicit a payment out of you. Now, to do that, they need to gain access to a system and achieve interactive access to move around on your network, do the whole credential harvesting, all that kind of like MITRE technique and tactics, things that we live through. But one of the main functions of that is they have to achieve execution. Now, if you look at all of these 0 days and supply chain attacks, highly, highly advanced operations that were conducted by very advanced operators to begin with, and then distilled down to the criminal aspect. But what was the detection opportunity? The detection opportunity was to look for my exposed and network connected processes spawning command interpreters, right? The command execution. I got to, before I came to Binary, and I spent a lot of times working in incident response consulting. And I got to see incidents from all over the world, from various degrees of sophistication. And one of those things is I was in the trenches for SolarWinds when it happened. And no one saw that coming, right? No one could have been prepared for it. But when you looked at the data, and that's on the bottom left, and that's an actual capture from SolarWinds incident, is that you can see the SolarWinds binary spawning PowerShell. And in that command line argument, they ran "who am I?" Right? And so that is very anomalous and is indicative of interactive access. So what I would like to propose to the group here is that we really shouldn't be waiting for something like this to happen to build these detection capabilities in our processes that are hosting web services. We should proactively be going out there and making sure that every box that we have that's exposed, whatever service that they are, is we should be looking for that spawning command interpreters or common post exploitation activity, uploading web shells, dumping credentials, creating new user accounts, all of these kind of things that continually happen over and over and over again, because they align with the North Star that we can use always. And this is the value of, this is what I think is the real value of threat intelligence. The guiding light and the North Star that should be driving our security strategy should be, excuse me, directly correlated to what the adversary needs to do to be successful. And so it's more than just hashes and domains and sort of those static indicators that we got, but it's understanding what the adversary considers success and how they go about achieving success. If we do that, we get a very nice picture of what we can do from a security response point of view that is going to be directly related to combating them completing their goals and objectives. And this is one of those things. So if like we're not assessing what we have exposed, if we don't understand how a web service runs, like anything that's running w3wp.exe and tomcat.exe, like we should, or on Linux, like Tomcat, and in this case, SSHD, we should already have those detections in. Like, because let's doomsday this, that no one ever caught this, right? And it got through, it made its way into Ubuntu. Like, and every open SSH server is vulnerable to arbitrary command execution through an incredibly sophisticated attack. We still have that opportunity, right? We still have a detection opportunity. And so this isn't going to be the last time that a major software distribution gets popped. We have to just accept that as reality. Supply chain has shown massive success, and when there's success, there's more activity. So this is going to continue. So we should be preparing for that by going out and proactively starting to build these detections. We don't want to block anything at first unless you feel really good about it, but I should at least be alarmed. I should be notified if SSHD spawns shell or has a grandchild of who am I or whatever that's going to be. I should already do that, like, because we know that this is going to happen, and you can base that on the value that it pertains to the attacker. So if nothing else, other than the coolness of this attack, take away from this that this is the reality of the threat landscape right now, and we need to be a little bit better about preparing for this rather than waiting for the next one to happen, because the next one is going to happen, and mistakes happen, right? This one was an architected, very well thought out operation, but vulnerabilities are introduced by well-meaning software engineers all the time. And that's not a knock on them. Mistakes happen, and they were trying to do the right thing. A mistake happened. It happens to all of us. I've made more mistakes than probably anyone on this call. So I get it, but we need to act accordingly. So that's like my big sort of like soapbox moment from here, is just start thinking about, when's the last time I did an audit for everything that's exposed? Or what am I hosting from a web application point of view internally that would directly align with the goals and objectives of the adversary? And let's go ahead and see about those telemetry sources. Am I able to build some sort of detection to look for these processes spawning child processes that align with post-exploitation? Next slide. Yeah,
That's my
JP.
turn. Yep, it's up to me now. Thanks, John. John, that was amazing. Thank you so much for that. And that's a lot of awesome information that you shared with us, and thank you for that. So for our side, so one of the things that we identified was with the XZ versions of Utils, we found that there were 3 different operating systems that were impacted: Debian Linux, both unstable and testing builds, as well as Kali for those that are doing pen testing or red teaming, and it's for the rolling releases, and then OpenSUSE Tumbleweed were the 3 that were impacted by this. Next slide. Now, it is crucial to properly address this issue, preventing any kind of breaches. Developers should quickly patch this vulnerability and notify users to update their systems. And now, how do you determine that you're impacted? Well, it's pretty simple, honestly. You want to check for any instances of the XZ Utils version 5.6 or 5.61, and you can run simple commands to determine the XZ version. For example, you run XZ TAC version, and I'm not going to go through all the commands, but you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, you can run simple commands on this. Also, if you want, you can also use KQL query to find vulnerable versions, and that information is right there on the slide. Next slide, please. And going quickly, as John was talking about earlier, the discovery of this. So during our investigation analysis, we did find the threat actor. You said he was Giata. His handle is Gita T75. And of course, he was conducting research on the XZ vulnerability since 2022. And we started to see that around March 24th, he was able to create the backdoor by obfuscating some of the libraries. And then we've identified that during that time in July, he was continued to conduct his research. And then in early March, the backdoor was tested. And then by March 29th, when the Microsoft researcher had identified it, the final package release was later discovered by security researchers, and it was on his GitHub page. Per our sources that we've seen on the underground, there are multiple threat actors that are now associated with this weaponized vulnerability. We haven't established any names to the threat actors, but it has been discussed quite often in the underground right now, along with plenty of other vulnerabilities as well. So next slide, please. So one of the things that we recommend is to basically check for any instances of the XZ Utils, the two versions that I mentioned, monitor for any unauthorized SSH and access attempts and any suspicious network activity. Also, please to make sure that any affected systems have the latest version of XZ Utils, so it should be 5.62 or higher. And if you're unable to get to that latest version, just apply your patches by your respective Linux distros and affected systems. And additionally, like John mentioned, we recommend well, not what John mentioned, but additionally, there might be the recommendation of disabling or limiting SSH access to known trusted sources. Also inform your stakeholders, including system admins, security teams, and devs about this backdoor attack, and ensure that they're aware of any necessary actions that may be needed to take in to secure their systems. So last slide, please. So in conclusion, this I think was a very, very interesting vulnerability. And as John mentioned, the amount of time this actor took to basically kind of social engineer his way to build to build the malicious package and everything shows some of these capabilities. Also really highlights the tracking of supply chain threats, especially when it comes to well-known and open source operating software such as Linux. And like John was mentioning earlier, a lot of software that we use, like Log4j, SolarWinds, supply chain attacks are probably the most difficult types of attack to identify. Normally, it's only after the fact that it happens, but concurring with John's sentiment that we definitely need to be more proactive in identifying those types of threats and activities. I believe that's it for us. So we got the floor open for Q&A if anyone has any questions or comments for me and John.
One final thought there is it's probably not a bad idea to expand your sort of assessment outside of the known impacted ones. I'd say that like this is a very fluid situation, and we might learn more as more reverse engineers dive into it. With Red Hat, from what I understand, the backdoor was included in one of the RPMs, but the macro to actually make it active was not. So it's probably a good idea just to assess your entire environment, looking for that liblzma like version, rather than trying to dive in to make sure that it was the confirmed impacted. It's probably just better to make sure that we're patching or downgrading whatever we need to do across all Linux.
Great. So far, no questions. If any, we'll give it a couple more minutes to see if anybody submits anything. But again, thank you for the time we had today. This will be a monthly series called Threat Talk, and we will be distributing it out to all of our customers and all of you again. The recording of this will be available. And just as I said that, we got a question. One of you guys want to take that one? Are there any off-the-shelf monitoring tools that could easily monitor all processes for spawn shells? Or does a custom tool or agent need to be written, is the question.
Oh, okay. So in this example, like most of the mainstream EDR is going to monitor process activity, right? Whether or not they would create an automatic alarm based on a process spawning like shell, probably not. So that may need to be a custom detection that you need to do. But there are free versions of Linux process monitoring tools. You can, do it in a shell script on yourself if you just want to watch that process, and whenever the output matches shell, get notified. But the most of the big name EDRs that most people have right now are Linux. They open, they have offered Linux support. So we're really looking for process execution activity here, because we wouldn't really have any other telemetry other than that SSHD process spawning, evil.
John?
Anything else?
That is all we have. As always, if you have additional questions for the team here, feel free to reach out to your account manager. We again thank you for the time, and we look forward to these new monthly sessions we'll be doing with you all. If you have any feedback for us, again, feel free to shoot us a message.
We got a
just
question.
got a question come in.
There they come. Good, thanks.
So I'll answer that one. So the problem with GitHub doing anything to mitigate these kind of attacks has been a challenge, mainly because you can find plenty of GitHub repos of like quote unquote legitimate like analysis tools that bad guys are using for command and control and stuff. And that's really up to Microsoft, because Microsoft's the ones that own GitHub. So, and I'm pretty sure that I think it's kind of a twofold thing. Personally, I think that Microsoft keeps these GitHub repos open because that information is being fed for intelligence for them to track this activity. But and in this case, it was a Microsoft researcher that identified this first. So I think that's the reason why they keep it on, because it does provide some intelligence value to them that they're able to identify.
Thanks, JP. John, you got a reframe of your you create mistakes comment earlier. You don't.
Yeah, I saw that.
Create opportunities.
Right. So yeah, that's a great point. And we have an opportunity here, right? And I always say that, like, it's been, tangentially from a security point of view, like we are at a crossroads in terms of like what we're going to do about it. And like we have an incredible opportunity right now. And we shouldn't waste the opportunity that stuff like this presents us. Stuff like ransomware, stuff like these supply chain vulnerabilities, to justify changes that a lot of us in the security community have been saying we should be making for 20 something years. We have to own the fact that it takes vulnerabilities to properly articulate the risk. And so we should take these opportunities to communicate for things like, all of the quote unquote security fundamentals that in operations, they often get challenging to do, but, limiting access and, I'm not going to say it, but like blast radius, network segmentation, limiting permissions, all of these kind of architectural things we could do to monitoring and telemetry detection and response, like working with vendors to get threat intelligence and get the latest and greatest and implementing it. These are all opportunities for us to kind of learn from this, right? And what we can do is protect ourselves knowing that this is a reality. So that's a great point, John.
Again, any feedback, anything you would like to learn from us during these monthly sessions, please provide to your account managers. We'll also likely be sending a survey out just to get your feedback on how this was run, what you would like to see different, any feedback you have for all of us, so that we can continue to improve this time with you all. And with that, there's no further questions, so we're going to go ahead and end here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.